My mother had always measured success in square footage, until one envelope proved her wrong in the most unexpected way. Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I've lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old brick building in Columbus, Ohio. The elevator breaks down twice a month. The hallway smells like someone's always cooking cabbage. But the rent is manageable, and I've made it mine. I painted the walls myself, soft gray with white trim. My mother never understood why I chose this life. She visited for the first time last spring, and I could see her face change the moment she stepped through my front door. She looked around slowly, her eyes landing on my secondhand couch, my tiny kitchen, my books stacked on the windowsill. She didn't say anything cruel right away. She just pressed her lips together, the way she always does when she's holding back disappointment. My younger sister, Emily, bought a house 2 years ago. 4 bedrooms, a backyard with a patio, granite countertops in the kitchen. My mother talks about that house like it's a cathedral. She posts pictures of it online. She tells her friends about the open floor plan. I've heard her describe it so many times that I could draw the layout from memory. Emily's success is something my mother wears proudly, like borrowed jewelry. That day in my apartment, my mother finally spoke. She laughed softly, shaking her head, and said she just didn't understand me. She asked why I was still renting at my age. She asked if I had given up on building something real. I told her I was happy, that my life was full even if it was small. She looked at me like I was speaking a language she had never learned. The truth is, I work as a grant writer for a nonprofit that helps kids in foster care find stable housing. I don't make much money, but I believe in what I do. Every morning, I wake up knowing my work matters to someone. That feeling fills spaces that square footage never could. My mother has never asked me about my job. She's never once asked what it feels like to help a child find a home. After her visit, I didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. That silence said more than any lecture could. I kept living my life, kept going to work, kept watering my little herb garden on the fire escape. I told myself I didn't need her approval. But late at night, when the city got quiet, I wondered why her opinion still had the power to make my chest feel hollow. Then my grandmother passed away. Grandma June had lived alone in a small lakeside cottage in Michigan since my grandfather died. She was the only person in my family who ever asked me real questions. She wanted to know what books I was reading, what dreams I was chasing, what made me laugh until I cried. She never once mentioned the size of my apartment or the balance in my savings account. The funeral was small and simple, exactly how Grandma June would have wanted it. My mother cried, but I noticed she also kept checking her phone. Emily stood beside her, looking around like she was already mentally dividing up the furniture. I sat in the back row, holding the cardigan Grandma June had knitted me the winter I turned 25. It still smelled faintly like her lavender hand cream. A few weeks later, my mother organized a family dinner at her house. She said the lawyer had sent some documents about Grandma June's estate, and we should all be together when she opened them. Her voice on the phone was strangely cheerful, almost excited. I felt uneasy. I didn't want to sit at that table and watch my grandmother's life get reduced to numbers and things. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine. My mother had printed out real estate listings for lake houses nearby, like she was already planning what to do with a potential inheritance. She barely looked up when I walked in. I took a seat at the end of the table and folded my hands in my lap, trying to stay calm. My mother opened the large envelope from the attorney with dramatic slowness. She pulled out several pages, scanning them quickly, her expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. Then she stopped. She read one section again. Then again. The room went completely silent. I watched her jaw tighten. Emily leaned over to read the page herself, and her eyebrows rose sharply. My mother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. She slid the paper across the table without a word. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. The document stated that Grandma June had left her lakeside cottage entirely to me. Not to my mother, not to Emily. Just me. There was a handwritten letter attached, folded neatly inside a smaller envelope with my name on it. I opened the letter slowly, aware that both of them were watching me. Grandma June's handwriting was shaky but clear. She wrote that she had always seen something special in me, something that reminded her of herself when she was young. She said I understood that a meaningful life isn't built on things, but on purpose. She wanted me to have a place that was truly mine. My mother's voice broke the silence. She demanded to know why. She said she had been the one who visited Grandma June every holiday, who called her every Sunday, who took care of the arrangements when she got sick. Her voice cracked with a mixture of hurt and anger. I didn't have an answer for her. I only had the letter and Grandma June's words, and the feeling that someone had finally understood me. Emily said nothing at first. Then she sighed and muttered something about it not being fair. I wanted to tell her that fairness had never lived in this family. Our mother had always given her the bigger piece, the warmer praise, the softer landing. For once, someone had chosen me, and it wasn't about money or property. It was about being seen. Grandma June had looked at my small life and found something valuable. That night, I drove home alone with the documents on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt heavy, full of tangled emotions I couldn't name. Part of me wished Grandma June had divided everything equally so I wouldn't have to carry this complicated gift. But another part of me, the part that had spent years feeling invisible, finally felt like I existed somewhere outside my own mind. I called my mother a few days later to check on her. The conversation was short and stiff. She said she needed time. I told her I understood, even though I wasn't sure I did. I wanted to explain that I hadn't asked for this, that Grandma June made her own choices, that I was just as surprised as anyone. But I knew no explanation would soften what she was feeling right now. Weeks passed, and I visited the cottage for the first time since the funeral. It was smaller than I remembered, with creaky floors and faded curtains, and a view of the lake that made everything else disappear. I stood on the porch and breathed in the cool air. I thought about Grandma June sitting in this same spot, watching the water, believing in me when no one else did. I haven't decided what I'll do with the cottage yet. Part of me wants to keep it exactly as it is, a quiet place to visit when the world gets too loud. Part of me imagines renting it out to families who need somewhere peaceful to rest. Either way, it feels like a second chance, not just for me, but for how I see my own worth. My mother and I still talk, though things are different now. There's a careful distance between us, like we're both walking on ice that might crack. I hope one day she'll understand that Grandma June's choice wasn't a rejection of her. It was simply recognition of something she had never bothered to notice. Sometimes the smallest lives hold the biggest hearts, and sometimes love finds its way to the ones who needed it most. 3 months had passed since I inherited Grandma June's cottage, and I still hadn't told anyone at work. I kept the keys in my purse like a secret, touching them sometimes when the day felt hard. My coworker noticed me smiling once and asked what was making me so happy. I just said I was thinking about someone I missed. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. My mother finally called me on a Tuesday evening in early October. Her voice sounded tired, softer than usual, like the anger had worn itself out. She said she wanted to see the cottage, to visit the place where her own mother had spent her final years. I hesitated before answering. Part of me wanted to protect that space from her judgment. But another part knew this was an olive branch. We agreed to meet there the following Saturday. I arrived early to open the windows and let fresh air move through the rooms. The cottage smelled like old wood and lake water, and something faintly sweet. Maybe the dried flowers Grandma June had hung in the kitchen years ago. I made coffee and sat on the porch, waiting, watching the leaves fall gently onto the water's surface. My mother's car pulled into the gravel driveway just after noon. She stepped out slowly, looking around like she was entering a memory. I noticed she had brought flowers, yellow roses, Grandma June's favorite. She didn't say hello right away. She just stood there, holding the bouquet, her eyes scanning the cottage like she was searching for something she had lost a long time ago. We walked inside together, and I let her lead. She moved through each room quietly, running her fingers along the furniture, pausing at old photographs on the walls. I watched her stop in front of a picture of herself as a child, standing next to Grandma June at this very lake. Her expression changed, softened, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she had forgotten how peaceful it was here. She told me stories I had never heard before, about summers spent catching fireflies, about her father teaching her to fish off the dock, about the summer she fell in love for the first time. I listened without interrupting. This was a version of my mother I had never been allowed to meet. We sat on the porch together as the afternoon stretched into evening. She asked me what I planned to do with the place. I told her I wasn't sure yet, that I wanted to take my time deciding. She nodded slowly, and I could tell she was trying hard not to offer her opinion. That small act of restraint felt like progress. Maybe we were both learning how to be different with each other. Before she left, she handed me a small wooden box she had found in the bedroom closet. She said it had my name on it, written in Grandma June's handwriting. I hadn't noticed it during my earlier visits. My hands trembled slightly as I took it from her. She didn't ask me to open it in front of her. She just kissed my cheek and walked to her car without looking back. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, dated over the past 10 years. Grandma June had written to me regularly but never sent them. She explained in the first letter that she didn't want to interfere, didn't want to cause tension between me and my mother, but she wanted me to know that she was always thinking of me, always proud of the woman I was becoming. I read every letter that night, sitting on the floor of the cottage with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. She wrote about her garden, about the books she was reading, about the birds that visited her feeder each morning. But mostly, she wrote about me. She remembered details I had forgotten, conversations we'd had years ago, small kindnesses I had shown her that she never stopped treasuring. One letter stood out from the rest. It was dated just 2 months before she passed. She wrote that she knew her time was coming and she wasn't afraid. She said her only regret was not telling me sooner how much I meant to her. She hoped the cottage would give me roots, a place to return to when the world made me feel small. She believed I would do something beautiful with it. I called Emily the next morning. I wasn't sure why, but I felt the need to reach out. She answered on the third ring, her voice guarded but curious. I told her about the letters, about our mother's visit, about the strange peace I was starting to feel. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. She said she was glad Grandma June had chosen me. She explained that she had spent her whole life being the favorite, and it was exhausting in ways no one ever talked about. She said our mother's expectations had shaped her into someone she didn't always recognize. The big house, the perfect kitchen, the life that looked good from the outside. None of it had made her feel whole. She admitted she sometimes envied my freedom to live small and true. That conversation cracked something open between us. We started talking more often. Not about the cottage or the inheritance, but about real things. She told me about her struggles, her doubts, her quiet loneliness inside that beautiful house. I told her about my fears, my stubborn pride, my longing to be seen. For the first time, we weren't competing. We were just two sisters, finally honest with each other. My mother noticed the change between us. She mentioned it one evening over the phone, her tone a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. She said she didn't understand what had shifted, but she was glad we were closer. I didn't explain the letters or the conversations. Some things belonged just to Emily and me. But I thanked her for visiting the cottage. I told her it had meant more than she knew. Winter came early that year, and I decided to spend Christmas at the cottage alone. I told my family I needed the quiet, and to my surprise, no one argued. I drove up on Christmas Eve with a small tree strapped to my roof and a bag full of groceries. The lake was frozen at the edges, and snow blanketed everything in soft white silence. I had never felt so peacefully alone. On Christmas morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. I looked out the window and saw Emily's car pulling up, followed by my mother's. They hadn't told me they were coming. They stepped out carrying bags and boxes, their breath visible in the cold air. Emily waved awkwardly. My mother held up a pie. I stood in the doorway, not sure whether to laugh or cry. We spent that day together in Grandma June's cottage, cooking in her tiny kitchen, sitting by the fire she had once tended. My mother told more stories. Emily laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years. I looked around at the two of them, these complicated women I had struggled to understand my whole life, and I felt something shift inside me like furniture being rearranged. That night, after they had gone to bed in the small guest rooms, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in Grandma June's quilt. The stars were impossibly bright over the frozen lake. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling unseen, all the quiet wounds I had carried without complaint. I realized that healing doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself, over and over again. The cottage didn't fix my family. We still have hard days, awkward silences, and old patterns that resurface when we least expect them. But something is different now. We're trying. We're showing up. And when I sit on that porch and watch the water, I feel Grandma June beside me, reminding me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes it waits quietly, in letters never sent and doors finally opened. Spring arrived slowly at the lake, melting the ice in uneven patches and filling the air with the smell of wet earth and new growth. I had started driving up to the cottage every other weekend, carving out time that belonged only to me. My small apartment in Columbus still felt like home, but the cottage had become something else entirely. It was a place where I could hear my own thoughts without the noise of the city drowning them out. My mother surprised me in late March by asking if she could visit again. She said she wanted to help me clean up the garden Grandma June had neglected in her final years. I agreed, though part of me felt protective of that overgrown space. It was wild and tangled, but it was honest. Still, I knew this was her way of building a bridge, one small gesture at a time, and I wanted to let her cross. She arrived on a Saturday morning with gardening gloves, a sun hat, and a trunk full of new plants she had bought at a nursery near her house. I watched her unload everything with a determination I recognized. This was how my mother loved, through doing, through fixing, through making things look the way she thought they should. I used to resent it. Now I was learning to see the care hidden underneath. We worked side by side for hours, pulling weeds and turning soil and planting bright clusters of marigolds and lavender. She talked while she worked, telling me things I had never known about her childhood, about her own complicated relationship with Grandma June. She admitted they had fought often when she was young. She had spent years trying to earn approval that never came the way she wanted it to. I stopped digging and looked at her. Her hands were covered in dirt, her face flushed from the effort. She looked more human to me in that moment than she ever had. I asked her why she had never told me any of this before. She shrugged and said she didn't think it mattered, but I could see in her eyes that it had always mattered, more than she wanted to admit. That evening, we sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sun sink behind the trees. She told me she was proud of me, and for once it didn't sound like a sentence with conditions attached. She said she knew she hadn't always shown it the right way. She said she was trying to be better, even though she wasn't sure she knew how. Her honesty felt like a door opening. Emily called me the following week with unexpected news. She and her husband were separating. Her voice was flat, like she had rehearsed the words so many times they had lost their shape. She said the big house felt empty now, full of echoes and memories of a life that had stopped fitting. I listened without offering advice. Sometimes the best thing you can give someone is the space to fall apart safely. She asked if she could come stay at the cottage for a few days. I said yes without hesitation. I told her I would meet her there, that we could figure things out together. I didn't know what she needed, but I knew I wanted to be there for her in a way no one had ever been there for me. Maybe that was the whole point of having something to offer. Emily arrived looking smaller than I remembered, like grief had pressed down on her shoulders and made her shrink. She didn't cry at first. She just walked through the cottage slowly, touching things, looking out windows, breathing in the quiet. I made us soup and bread. Simple things that didn't require conversation. We ate together at Grandma June's old kitchen table, and the silence between us felt comfortable rather than heavy. On the second night, she finally talked. She told me about the years of pretending, the pressure to be perfect, the slow erosion of a marriage built more on appearances than connection. She said she had been so focused on building the life our mother wanted for her that she forgot to ask what she actually wanted for herself. Her words echoed something I had felt my whole life, just from a different direction. I told her about Grandma June's letters, the ones I had found in the wooden box. I read her a few passages, the parts where Grandma June wrote about noticing things, about paying attention to the people who lived quietly instead of loudly. Emily cried then, soft tears that rolled down her cheeks without sound. She said she wished someone had noticed her too, beneath all the shiny surfaces she had worked so hard to maintain. We spent the rest of the week walking by the lake, cooking simple meals, and talking more honestly than we ever had. I learned things about my sister I had never known. She loved poetry, but had stopped reading it years ago. She had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but chose business because it seemed more practical. She missed the person she used to be before she started measuring her worth in other people's expectations. My mother came up for one day during that week, and something shifted between the three of us. She didn't criticize Emily's decision or try to fix anything. She just sat with us, listening, nodding, holding space in a way I had never seen her do before. Maybe watching her daughter's struggle had taught her something new about love. Maybe she was finally learning that presence matters more than perfection. Before Emily left, she thanked me for something I hadn't expected. She said the cottage had given her permission to stop pretending. She said watching me live small and true had always made her feel a little jealous, even when she acted like she pitied me. She admitted she had been wrong about so many things. Hearing her say that felt like setting down a weight I didn't know I had been carrying. Summer came, and I made a decision about the cottage. I wouldn't sell it or rent it out. I would keep it exactly as it was, a place for anyone in my family who needed somewhere soft to land. I told my mother and Emily that the door would always be open. The cottage had become more than an inheritance. It had become a kind of promise, a place where we could practice being honest with each other. I started writing in the evenings, sitting on the porch with a notebook and a cup of tea. Nothing important, just observations about the lake, memories of Grandma June, thoughts about what it means to build a life that feels true. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like water finding its way downhill. I didn't know if anyone would ever read them, but the writing itself felt like breathing. My mother visited more often as the months passed. She brought less each time, fewer plants and projects, more willingness to simply be. One afternoon, she sat beside me on the dock and told me she was sorry for all the years she had made me feel invisible. She said she didn't fully understand why she had done it, but she wanted me to know she saw me now. Her apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. Emily moved into a small apartment closer to the city, and she called it her fresh start. She sent me pictures of her tiny kitchen, her secondhand couch, her books stacked on the windowsill. I smiled when I saw them. She was learning what I had known all along, that space doesn't determine worth, and that sometimes the smallest rooms hold the biggest possibilities. She was finally finding her own version of enough. On the anniversary of Grandma June's passing, I drove to the cottage alone and spent the day reading her letters again. I thought about all the love she had stored up in silence, all the words she had written but never sent, all the faith she had placed in me without ever needing anything in return. I promised her I would try to live the way she had believed I could, with purpose, with presence, with quiet courage. The sun set over the lake, painting the water gold and pink and violet. I stood on the porch and felt something settle deep inside my chest. I had spent so many years chasing approval, trying to prove I was worthy of love. But Grandma June had known the truth all along. I was already enough. I had always been enough. And now, finally, I was starting to believe it too. A full year had passed since I first opened that envelope at my mother's dining table. The cottage by the lake had become woven into my life in ways I never expected. I drove there at least twice a month now, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emily, occasionally with my mother. Each visit felt like returning to a version of myself I was still learning to trust. The walls held memories now, new ones layered over old. My work at the nonprofit had started to feel different too. I found myself writing grant proposals with more clarity, more heart, more conviction. My supervisor noticed the change and asked what had shifted. I told her I had inherited a cottage, but that wasn't really the answer. What I had truly inherited was permission to believe my own voice mattered. That belief bled into everything I touched, every word I wrote, every child I tried to help. In early autumn, I received an email that made my hands shake. A foundation I had written to months ago wanted to meet with me. They were considering a significant donation to our organization, the largest we had ever received. My supervisor asked me to lead the presentation. I stayed late every night for 2 weeks, preparing slides and practicing my words until they felt like second nature. I had never wanted anything so badly. The meeting took place on a gray Wednesday morning in a downtown office building. I wore Grandma June's pearl earrings for luck, the ones I had found in her jewelry box during my first visit to the cottage. I thought about her as I rode the elevator up, imagining her quiet confidence, her steady belief in doing good without fanfare. I wanted to make her proud, even though she would never know what I was about to attempt. The presentation went better than I could have hoped. I spoke about the children we served, the families we helped reunite, the small victories that never made headlines but changed lives forever. The foundation representatives listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked me for my passion. When I left the building, the sky had cleared and sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I felt something lift inside my chest, fragile but bright. 2 weeks later, we received the news. The foundation had approved our grant, the full amount we had requested. My supervisor cried when she told me. She said this would allow us to expand into 3 new counties, to hire more staff, to reach children we had never been able to help before. I sat at my desk after she left and stared at the wall, trying to understand that something I had done could ripple outward so far. I called Emily that evening to share the news. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said she always knew I would do something important, even when I didn't believe it myself. Her words surprised me. I had spent so many years thinking she saw me as lesser, as the sister who had chosen wrong. But maybe I had misread her all along. Maybe we had both been trapped in roles we never auditioned for. My mother's reaction was quieter, but no less meaningful. She paused for a long moment after I told her, and I braced myself for the question I dreaded. Something about salary or promotion, or what this meant for my career trajectory. But instead, she simply said she was proud of me. She said Grandma June would have been proud too. Then her voice cracked slightly, and she changed the subject to something easier. I let her. That weekend, I drove to the cottage alone. I needed space to process everything that had happened, to sit with my own feelings without anyone else's reactions shaping them. The leaves had started to turn, painting the trees around the lake in shades of amber and crimson. I sat on the dock with my feet dangling over the water and thought about all the versions of myself I had been over the past year. I had started therapy a few months earlier, something I had resisted for years. My therapist was a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Reyes, who never rushed me or told me what to feel. She helped me understand that my need for approval had roots deeper than my mother's favoritism. It stretched back generations, a pattern repeated over and over until someone decided to break it. I was learning that person could be me. Emily visited the cottage the following weekend. She looked healthier than she had in months, her eyes brighter, her shoulders less tense. She told me she had started taking a pottery class, something she had always wanted to try but never made time for. She showed me pictures on her phone of lopsided bowls and crooked mugs, and her pride in them was contagious. She was rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under expectations. We spent the afternoon raking leaves and talking about our childhoods. She remembered things differently than I did, moments I had interpreted as rejection that she saw as obliviousness. She admitted she had been so focused on performing for our mother that she barely noticed anyone else's pain. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. Understanding her perspective didn't erase my wounds, but it softened their edges just enough to let light through. Our mother joined us on Sunday, arriving with a casserole and a hesitant smile. The three of us ate dinner together at Grandma June's table, and for the first time, it felt natural instead of forced. My mother asked Emily about her pottery class. She asked me about the children my nonprofit served. She listened more than she spoke, and I could see how hard she was working to be different. Change is slow and imperfect, but it was happening. After dinner, my mother handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before, a picture of Grandma June as a young woman, standing in front of this very cottage on her wedding day. She was smiling so wide her eyes were nearly closed, her whole body radiating joy. My mother said she had found it while cleaning out old boxes at her house. She wanted me to have it for the cottage. I hung the photograph above the fireplace that night after they left. Grandma June's young face looked out at the room she had loved for so many decades, the room where she had raised her daughter and welcomed her granddaughters and written letters she never sent. I wondered what she would think of us now, 3 generations of women learning to be honest with each other. I hoped she could feel how hard we were trying. Winter came gently that year, with soft snowfalls instead of bitter storms. I spent Christmas at the cottage again, but this time I wasn't alone. Emily came, and so did my mother. We cooked together, argued about small things, laughed at old memories, and sat in comfortable silence when words ran out. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward pauses and unspoken hurts. But we were there, choosing each other despite everything. On New Year's Eve, I stood on the frozen dock and watched fireworks explode over the distant town across the lake. Emily stood beside me, wrapped in a blanket, her breath visible in the cold air. She asked me what I wished for the coming year. I thought for a long moment before answering. I said I wished for more of this, more honesty, more presence, more grace for myself and the people I loved. My mother joined us outside just before midnight. She stood on my other side, and for a moment, the three of us were silent together, watching the sky light up with color and sound. I felt her hand find mine in the darkness, her fingers cold but firm. She squeezed once, quickly, then let go. It was such a small gesture, but it said everything she still struggled to put into words. The new year began quietly, with fresh snow covering the cottage like a blessing. I woke early and made coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of pink and gold. I thought about Grandma June, about her faith in me, about the inheritance that had nothing to do with property and everything to do with being seen. She had given me so much more than a cottage. She had given me permission to become myself. I drove back to Columbus that afternoon with the photograph of young Grandma June tucked safely in my bag. My small apartment welcomed me home, warm and familiar, the gray walls and secondhand furniture exactly as I had left them. But I was different now. I had roots somewhere, people who loved me imperfectly but persistently, and a future that felt open instead of small. That was more than enough. That was everything. 2 years had passed since that first envelope changed everything. I was 36 now, and the cottage had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I knew which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck in humid weather, which corner of the porch caught the best afternoon light. Grandma June's presence still lingered in every room, not as a ghost, but as a gentle reminder that love outlasts the people who carry it. I never felt alone there. My work at the nonprofit had grown in ways I never imagined. The grant I had secured led to partnerships with other organizations, expanding our reach across the entire state. Children who once had nowhere to go were finding families, finding stability, finding hope. My supervisor promoted me to Director of Development, a title that still felt too big for someone who once doubted whether her voice mattered. But I was learning to wear it anyway. Emily had transformed in the years since her divorce. She sold the big house and bought a small bungalow with a garden she tended herself. She finished her pottery classes and started selling her work at local craft fairs. Her pieces were imperfect and beautiful, each one carrying the marks of her hands, her effort, her willingness to try. She told me once that starting over at 33 was the bravest thing she had ever done. My mother turned 65 that spring, and Emily suggested we throw her a party at the cottage. I hesitated at first, worried about disrupting the peace I had built there. But Emily reminded me that the cottage was meant to be shared, that Grandma June would have wanted it filled with family and laughter. She was right. Grandma June had never hoarded her love. She had scattered it freely, trusting it would take root wherever it landed. We spent a week preparing for the party, cleaning and decorating and cooking dishes from Grandma June's old recipe cards. My mother arrived on a Friday afternoon, and her face when she saw the cottage took my breath away. Streamers hung from the porch railings. Flowers filled every vase we could find. A banner Emily had painted herself stretched across the living room, reading "Happy Birthday" in wobbly, joyful letters. The party was small, just the three of us and a few of my mother's closest friends who made the drive from the city. We ate too much and laughed too loud, and told stories about Grandma June until the sun went down. My mother cried twice, once from joy and once from something deeper, a grief that had never fully healed. I held her hand during the second round of tears, and she let me without pulling away. After the guests left, the three of us sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching stars appear one by one over the lake. My mother thanked us for the party, her voice thick with emotion. Then she said something that surprised me. She apologized for the years she had spent comparing us, for the damage her favoritism had caused, for the ways she had made us compete for love that should have been freely given. Emily and I looked at each other across the darkness. We had waited so long to hear those words, and now that they had arrived, I wasn't sure what to do with them. I told my mother I forgave her, and I meant it, even though forgiveness is never a single moment, but a choice you make over and over again. Emily said the same. Our mother nodded slowly, and I could see the weight lifting from her shoulders, inch by inch. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the cottage in the darkness, running my fingers along walls that had witnessed so much change. I stopped at the photograph of young Grandma June above the fireplace, her wedding day smile still radiant after all these decades. I whispered a thank you to her, for the cottage, for the letters, for believing in me before I knew how to believe in myself. The silence that followed felt like an answer. In the morning, my mother made breakfast for everyone. Pancakes and bacon and fresh coffee, moving through Grandma June's kitchen like she belonged there. I watched her from the doorway, this complicated woman who had shaped me in ways both painful and profound. She caught me staring and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm. Something had shifted between us, something that felt permanent this time. We had finally stopped performing for each other. Emily left that afternoon with promises to return soon. She hugged me longer than usual, whispering that she loved me, that she was grateful every day that I was her sister. I held on to her tightly, remembering all the years we had wasted being strangers who shared the same blood. We couldn't get that time back, but we could build something better with whatever years we had left. That felt like enough. My mother stayed one more night at the cottage, just the two of us. We sat together on the dock as the sun set, our feet dangling over the water the way mine had on countless evenings before. She told me stories about her childhood I had never heard, about struggles she had hidden, about dreams she had abandoned. I listened without judgment, letting her become three-dimensional in a way I had never allowed her to be. She asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because it was genuine. I thought about my small apartment, my meaningful work, my sister who had become my friend, this cottage that held so much love. I told her yes, I was happy, maybe for the first time in my adult life. She nodded and said that was all she had ever really wanted for me, even when she showed it wrong. After she left, I spent a week at the cottage alone, writing in my notebook and walking by the lake and letting the silence fill me up. I had started working on something bigger than journal entries, a collection of essays about inheritance and family and the complicated ways we learn to love each other. I didn't know if it would ever become a book, but the writing itself felt necessary, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. On my last evening before returning to Columbus, I found one more letter from Grandma June. It had slipped behind the drawer of her nightstand, hidden for who knows how long. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, her familiar handwriting shaky but determined. She wrote that she hoped I would find this someday, when I was ready to hear what she needed to say. She told me I was her greatest hope for this family. She wrote that she had watched 3 generations of women in our family struggle to love each other honestly. She had made mistakes with my mother, had been too critical, too distant, too afraid to show softness. She saw those patterns repeating and felt powerless to stop them. But then she watched me grow up, quiet and strong and different, and she dared to believe the cycle could be broken. She put all her faith in me. I cried reading those words, tears that felt like release rather than sadness. Grandma June had seen something in me that I was only beginning to see in myself. She had trusted me with more than a cottage. She had trusted me with the possibility of change, with the belief that families can heal if someone is brave enough to start. I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others, this final gift from a woman who loved me completely. I drove back to Columbus the next morning with the windows down and the autumn air rushing through the car. My small apartment waited for me, familiar and welcoming, but it no longer felt like the only place I belonged. I had roots now, spread across 2 homes and 3 hearts, and a lifetime of memories still being made. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was Sarah, fully myself, finally whole. The years ahead would bring more challenges, I knew. My mother would slip back into old patterns sometimes. Emily and I would disagree. The cottage would need repairs I couldn't afford. Life doesn't wrap itself up neatly just because you've learned a few lessons. But I had something I never had before. I had proof that change was possible, written in letters and whispered in apologies, and planted in gardens that grew despite everything. On the anniversary of receiving that first envelope, I returned to the cottage one more time. I stood on the porch where my mother had once laughed at my apartment, where my sister had cried about her broken marriage, where I had learned to stop waiting for permission to exist. The lake stretched out before me, calm and endless, reflecting a sky full of possibility. Grandma June was right. I was her greatest hope, and I was finally ready to believe it.